Hey everybody, welcome back to the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. I'm your host, Gordo Gambles. Welcome back to the full card breakdown. This time for Dana White Contender Series, we are on to week 4 of season 8 here in 2024, man. And I am excited to be back. If y'all didn't know, I had a couple week break. I was off. I was relaxing, hit the books for a bit, had some time off, but we missed ourselves a week of Dana White Contender Series, which I don't like doing because you guys know we've been doing it for a few years now. Me and Liam have been breaking down these fights. Honored to be joined by Pierce a lot of the times too. You guys know that, but we've been breaking them down. We've been having some fun doing so. I missed it last week, but guys, I wasn't missing this one. We have ourselves a phenomenal fight card. As always, some Tuesday night violence, and I'm excited to break it down with my main man, Liam. Welcome back to Plays YouTube channel. As always, how you doing?
My man, it's good to be back. I'm excited to talk about these fights. My guy VB put out the bat signal this week, so I had to do a little bit of early research, and now we have some props opening up. We have some more things to talk about, right? Some discussion points, and I'm excited to break it all down with you.
Yeah, man, it's fights on Tuesday. What can you have any better than that? You got your coffee brewed there. We're ready to go. I'm back home right now. I'm in a nice little setup. If I have any technical difficulties, I apologize. I don't have that nice little brick layout like I usually do, but what we do have is some fights nonetheless. Let's get started with our very first fight of the night at the 155 lightweight division. We have ourselves the 6-1 Quillian Oh my, I messed that up already. The names this week, Quinlan Salkilld versus Gage Young. We have ourselves Gage Young 8-1 fighting out of Missouri in the States versus the Australian prospect in Quinlan here, and a fighter that I think is going to be a pretty good one. Both 24 years old, both have fought decent amount of competition for their debuts here, but I would be remiss if I did not hand it over to my co-host to start off the night. Very first fight, man. I do think it's a fun one. I do think this is one of the better fights in the card, and one where these past couple of weeks, these first fights tonight have really set the tone. I'm looking forward to this one. Are you as well?
Of course, my man. I'm looking forward to this fight for a number of reasons. First and foremost, though, I got to give a shout out, right? Who's my rooting interest for this fight? I'm rooting for the American here, Gage Young. Reason being, he followed me on Twitter, so of course I got to give a shout out to my guy and show a little love and support there. That being said, he's got his hands full, right? It's not going to be an easy fight here by any means with this kind of opponent. He's dealing with a size disadvantage in this fight. It's not uncommon for him. There's a couple guys we're going to talk about on this card. They're very talented, but maybe a little bit undersized relative to their opposition. And when you're looking at this fight, you got a big, long opponent, very lanky, and then a guy who's a little bit more stocky, right? He's got a muscular build. And I can relate to that in some ways as well, where a lot of people used to look at me and say, like, what do you wrestle at 145 or something? And I was like, dude, I can't. It would take a really difficult weight cut in order to do that because I have some muscle behind me. I'm strong, but I don't look as big as a lot of these other guys who are taller or whatever, but maybe they get muscled around a little bit more when we lock up in those positions. So it's kind of one of those things where I think that you see some of these guys that can make that work, but it mostly is wrestlers, grapplers, right? Guys that are going to close distance, get on top. It's very difficult to deal with these long, lanky guys in a striking based fight unless you're very good at measuring distance. Ilia Topuria is somebody you think of as a guy that can kind of, find his angles, get inside. But it's very difficult to do that, right? It takes a lot of practice, a lot of study. And then think of the Jai Herbert fight. One mistake, and a guy who's maybe less talented but has that ability to just hit you from a further distance, he can compromise you completely. So that's the reason why you often see people close distance when they're the smaller fighter. And I'm looking at this fight, I'm saying to myself, okay, he's probably got to close the distance a little bit here, getting close. The problem is his opponent is so willing to grapple. And I think that he's a guy that can go out there and wrestle a little bit. He can scramble a little bit. But we've seen what has been the hang-up in his career when he gets into some of those deeper exchanges, when guys start to wrestle and grapple back into him, he can have a little bit of trouble there. I think that maybe he can address that. He's still a very young guy. Maybe he's made some improvements there. But that's the error that I see from him on tape that could cost him. When you look at the prop market, they're kind of seeing this the same way. Offshore, it opens up with the submission prop pretty low here. That's kind of how I see him getting the job done. I think if this fight plays out on the feet, much more honest fight, I think you got to Gage Young with a lot of power. His KO prop sitting at about 4-1. That seems like the way I would look potentially at his side. I think that that's his best chance to maximizing victory. What do we always talk about with big, tall, long opponents, especially guys that want to get in and grapple? Sometimes they keep their chin a little bit upright. Sometimes they're there to be hit. And when you get in close trying to grab a hold of somebody, he throws with a lot of power. He throws with a lot of commitment, and he shuts guys' lights off. But I think that overall, neither one of these guys has fought the highest level of competition, but one guy has looked a little bit cleaner and a little bit more diverse in his path to victory. I think that's the bigger fighter here in Quillen Salkilld. So I think we got the right favorite in this matchup, but I don't know if it should be a huge line because both these guys are still pretty inexperienced, I would reckon, and a lot to grow and learn in terms of skills. So I think that both guys are talented, but I think overall, guy who's a little bit more developed is the Australian here.
Yeah, as you mentioned, 24 years old, they still have a long way to go here in this matchup. And even though we do go out there and mention their skills, I think they are still at the right point of their careers to make those improvements. You look at someone like Salkilld, who is going out there, he is fighting at Eternal MMA. He's fighting at a decent promotion over there. He's a training partner with Cody Haddon. He's got to beat disenframe this division. I think he has all these tools to go out there set up for success. You mentioned his very aggressive ground game. I think he can utilize that to his advantage in this matchup. But on the feet too, I don't think he's at too much of a disparity there. I think he's got some solid counter striking. I think he's able to move in and out. He's got that frame to utilize that length there too. I don't like how reckless he can be defensively, especially when he is going first in those exchanges. He can leave his chin out there ready to be countered. You mentioned the power Gage Young does have, but I do think when it comes down to picking a winner, gun to my head here, Quinlan is a guy who I think has more paths to getting it done, whether it be the rangier striking, whether it be the aggression or the grappling, or even just be the cardio as the fight goes on. Gage Young, a guy who I think is very explosive early on, has a lot of power, but does slow as the fight goes, whereas we have seen Quinlan go out there, go 5 rounds. We've seen him be able to go out there and continue this cardio high pace. So I think that there's just more ways for Salkilld to get it done. With that being said, Gage Young is someone who I do think has paths. I don't think it's a clear one-sided match for Salkilld here. I think on the feet, Gage Young can definitely go out there and crack him. Salkilld, like I mentioned, leaves himself to be hit. He is there to be countered, especially when he's going first in these matchups. And Young throws with fight-ending intention. He is very, very powerful. He does have some decent Muay Thai, a decent team keep up the middle as well. And although he doesn't have the same pedigree of jiu-jitsu as someone like Quinlan here, I think he's got some solid wrestling. I think he could establish some top control. I think he could go out there and potentially win minutes from top position as well. If I have seen Quinlan struggle there, I think it could make for a very competitive matchup. I think both sides could have their moments. It's just when it comes down to picking it from a betting perspective, I got to go with the guy who I just think has more ways of getting it done, not only with the frame, but with a more aggressive jiu-jitsu and potential to win the counter striking as well in Salkilld. Now, you did do a show with VB. Shout out to my boy BB. I've been in a show a couple times. You have seen the odds this week, then, have you?
I have for most of these matchups, and yeah, I did see where we were lined on this one, and VB I think attributed to this line shortening a little bit as well. He talked about on the show. He bet the underdog in this spot, and I think he was a plus 185, 200 range a little bit earlier in the week. Now he's about a plus 160 or so.
Yeah, it's interesting because usually, you're getting those fresh looks into it. Now you've seen the market develop. You've seen how it's progressed. You've seen where the money's coming in and what seems to be the sharper books, stuff like that too. My very first instinct was potentially Young could go out there and potentially win minutes. I did think the original opening of the Young decision was a bit wide. However, I don't want to limit myself to him in that path of victory because I do think the KO for him would also be there, as well as the fact that I'm just picking Quinlan outright. I don't think I want to go out there and force losing bets, if that makes sense. I think there may be some value, but we'll see where I end up in the market wise, especially if maybe some more local books are able to go out there and give us a better odds. Let's put it that way. Salkilld, I think he can win a multitude of ways. The submission, as you mentioned, got steamed. I don't see as much value on that personally. I think a decision could be looked into that as well. But to me, at the end of the day, the pick is going to be Quinlan for me. I do think it gets more ways getting it done. However, the line's sitting about right where I was put it as well. Anything you'd like to add on this final fight here before we move on?
Yeah, I'll just add one thing, which is that it opened at 3-1 on the sub.
Nope.
That seemed like a good entry point. Plus 185. Now you've missed the boat, I feel. So let's see what the domestics open up here.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how those open up. I've been refreshing all day. Hopefully get them tomorrow. But let's move on to the second fight of the night. And I'm going to be honest here. I have a lot of excitement going into this one. Pre-tape, you look at this one, you see yourself a Canadian fighter, the number one female Canadian fighter prospect. You see the last name? That's my last name too. I'm not going to lie. Someone I can cheer for. The first thing I do is look up on Twitter, see how they're doing, to see if there's any viral clips of them. You see her, she's choking out girls unconscious. She's making them piss themselves in the cage. Some scary stuff there with the bulldog choke. It looks like there's some decent promise to these fighters. And seeing her as a huge minus 700 favorite, I'm like, yes, Canada, let's go. And don't get me wrong, I like Shannon Clark. I like the MMA Barbie, but she wasn't this highly touted prospect that I actually wanted to go out there, and I wasn't as blown away as the tape as I expected to be. Let's put it that way. I think she's extremely physically imposing. I think she goes out there, utilizes that clinch phenomenally. She is a very, very powerful and strong woman. She would beat my ass. I have no doubt about it. But she is someone who I think is kind of limited to that. She's someone who likes to cage press. She's someone who, yes, can be very aggressive and close, but I was not blown away with her striking. She has the fundamentals. She's got the ability to go out there and throw leg kicks and potentially do some damage in the clinch. But she is someone who I think is predicated on that close in tight success, whether it be on the clinch, whether it be on the mat, utilizing the physicality. And I do think that at range, especially if she makes it to the UFC here, she is going to have some problems. Luckily for her, though, the reason she is a minus 700 favorite here is she's facing the 4-0 Unisai Duben, who, I don't even know how to put this into words, but her record is fraudulent. And that's putting it nicely, right? 4-0. You're like, oh my God, nice. All 4 of her wins are against 0-0 fighters. She has not fought a fighter with a win so far. She's fighting people from the regional scene, people who are just like, hey, you want to come and get a fight here? We're recruiting the local soccer moms. Let's put it that way. She's going out there, and don't get me wrong, she's opposing her opponents, but she has not really fought anybody at the highest level in her own right. She's someone who does have some high-level taekwondo. She has a good ability to go out there. She throws with decent power. I think she's someone who maybe it's the lower level of competition, but she didn't look like she had the most technique in there. But when you're fighting down to your competition, you just want to get them out of there. She did do that, but she has not been tested. I do think she has, being the smaller fight here against someone as physical as Shannon Clark, I think Shannon Clark's the rightful favorite. I do think she should win this fight, especially in close, but I'm not in the market of laying minus 700 on someone who I do think is pretty one-dimensional. I will cheer for the Canadian here, but what are your thoughts on Clark this week?
Yeah, I find myself in the rare position of being more bullish on the Canadian than the Canadian, but I just think that this chick is extremely violent and aggressive, and you know me, I'm pretty simple sometimes with my handicapping of these fights, which is like who's going to go out there and pursue the finish and be really violent about it. Oftentimes, that's the person that gets to work early and gets to where they're going, right? And I think that in this case, what I saw from Shannon Clark in the footage that I watched is she's a very aggressive girl in all these positions. And when somebody's trying to get after her, she's finding ways to stay aggressive. So if she's underneath, she's throwing elbows, she's just staying, high on the work rate. And I think for a lot of people that breaks them down over time. So for me, I don't know that I feel great about laying a huge price here as it continues to blow out both on the money line and in the props. But I just think that this girl is much more physical. And when you watch these two women face off, I think that's quite evident as well. I always talk about a phrase that I heard from my college wrestling coach that really stuck with me: body composition. It's a very important thing, for your own health and things like that when you're talking about managing your life as an athlete, a combat athlete. And I think that they have vastly different body compositions, right? Just to be frank about it. So I feel like Shannon Clark is much more physically prepared for this opportunity. And for that reason, I think she's going to win the fight and break this girl down over time. I think she's just too imposing and overwhelming for most women to deal with. And I think her physicality is going to be too much. I think she's going to get the finish here. Probably TKO, probably round 2 or 3.
I like to hear that, and I do apologize. Girlfriend's out in Europe right now, and I do have to answer the phone call for that. I was trying to tell her, I'm like, I may have a new girlfriend here after Shannon Clark demolishes her and puts Canadian WMMA on the map, like Jasmine Jasovicius, but she didn't want to hear it. But no, I did hear everything you said there. I did like all that stuff. I do think she's someone who I like to go out there and see have some success. The question I have here is I have yet to see Duben really dragged into deep waters, right? And although I'm with you, I think Shannon Clark should win this fight at a high clip. I don't know how bullish I am on her, which is funny. Bullish, bulldog choke. Anyways, I don't know how excited I am to play her to win inside the distance here when I do think she has a multitude of ways of getting it done. I could very well see her just piecing her up in the clinch and winning minutes that way and not getting the finish. So I'm kind of hesitant to go out there and play a steeper price on the side of the distance on someone who I don't think rates out as the most dominant finisher at all times. But hey, I'm all for cheering for the Canadian here. I do think she's able to go out there and get it done. I think she wins this fight more times than not. I agree with the line movement. Dixon's asking the real questions, though. We'll see what that means there. Anyways, I do think, lesbian or not, I do think that it is Clark that does have the strength advantage here. She is someone who is pretty aggressive, is pretty strong, and does make her living fighting at the clinch there. Should be an interesting spot there. And I am looking forward to this fight. This has to be one of the most interesting. This is like an Askar Mozarov type of signing, though, with Duben, though. Like, is there something we don't know behind the scenes? Like, is she going out there and proving something? There are, I think, just way more apt challengers in the regional scene who have fought a better level of competition who deserve to be here. With that being said, though, I'm all for giving this Canadian a shot here. Let's go, Clark, and hopefully she'll go out there and get it done, preferably getting it done by second or third, the way that Liam mentioned. All right, let's move on to the next one here. And as we do so, guys, make sure to like button down below, subscribe to the channel, show some love. We got some fun fights here, and then we have ourselves another very big favorite, 12-0 Austin Bashi versus the 8-2 Dorian Ramos. Ramos coming in on short notice against the highly touted Bashi here. Now, a few things I mentioned this one. I'm excited to talk about this one. This is a prospect in Bashi who I do like to see, who I do rate up pretty well. 22 years old, only 12 fights, a guy who does have a lot of hype behind him, and the line is ballooned because of it. But Liam, it's your turn to break it down, man. What do you see in these two prospects? Are you as high on Bashi as I am, and are you looking forward to this fight?
Yeah, this is exactly what I was talking about when I said, maybe they're a little bit small for the division, but they just seem to have the right skills to manage that, right? What you need is good distance management, ability to get in and out of range without getting clipped, and then some kind of, skill set you could leverage. If you could go out there and outstrike everybody on the feet despite being smaller. Alexander Volkanovski, made a career of that at the championship level for a little while, right? By using his low kicks, by being evasive, by being very strategic. It's not going to work for everybody, right? But you can craft a game around your body type and be very effective. And when you look at a guy like Bashi, he has the wrestling and the grappling to get the fight into the positions he wants, but he's not going to panic if he doesn't get it there. He could still strike on the feet. He can be effective in those positions, and he can, do a lot of damage there. So I feel like he's a guy that has power in his hands. He's got an ability to go out there and crack, and he also can get the fight to the mat and implement his skill set from there. I think he's got good positional control. I think he's got good passing. I think he's got a very heavy top game overall, good ground and pound. So for me, I just like the total package from Bashi. I think his opponent, Dorian Ramos, not a bad fighter, but I was saying that I thought the guy that he lost to, Mateus Camilo, should be, on the Contender Series. That guy's a lot of fun. And he was out there putting on a very high-paced fight with him. The thing about this guy, Dorian Ramos, is he's got a lot of heart. He's got a lot of will, wants to go out there and win, pushes a high pace rate, gets in guys' face, can break people. I just don't know if his physicality really translates. His best win was over a very young kid, and he's a guy that has been out there pushing, whatever advantage he has. That's what you got to do as a fighter. But I don't think he's the heaviest handed guy, so I don't think he's going to hurt Bashi on the feet, very likely. And I think that Bashi can probably keep pace with him if they're on the feet, in terms of like his impactful shots will get more attention and be a little bit more significant than whatever volume he's pumping out. There's a lot of like touch shots that don't look like they're doing much damage. And it seems like guys just no sell his power, right? They just stand right in front of him, getting hit clean in the chin. They're not caring about it. And that doesn't seem like a bullish signal. The way he puts people down is like they're exhausted. They just can't stand up no more. He takes them down, that kind of thing. He's a very active guy, though, in terms of when he gets on top. He does look to go for ground and pound. He does look to get to his own offense quickly. I will say that about him. Like he has no illusions about like how he's going to win. A lot of times he's trying to just touch you as many times as he can, put up points on the board. He's a guy that kind of fights for each round, but he does slow down in fights when the going gets tough. If you look at the coin fight, what happened in that fight? He got out wrestled, he got out grappled, he got out scrambled, and he started to get tired. And so, the things that were working for him early to counter wrestle and counter grapple, they just weren't there anymore. And when he can't leverage his wrestling and grappling and somebody tries to leverage it on him, that's when it starts to fall apart for him. So he could do very well for 5-6 minutes being the dominant, assertive wrestler, and then it kind of falls off a cliff. And I feel like in this fight, he's not going to have any success trying to be a dominant or assertive wrestler against Bashi, just because Bashi, I think, is the more technical guy there. And I think despite being a little bit smaller and more compact, I just think he's a little more technical with his wrestling.
And that he is, and that height is something I do want to talk about right away. He was originally supposed to face someone who I think was 5'11", and that was supposed to be a really fun matchup as well. Now he is there listed as 5'3", going out there facing someone at 5'7". I think they did correct it. Now it does say 5'6". Now I'm looking at it, but this was the weigh-ins today. I can't. Let's see if we can pull up. Not the biggest height discrepancy there. It is someone who I was, not too afraid by seeing that. It is someone who is going to be a shorter fighter and a guy who I do truly think should belongs at 135 here, but a guy who I've liked everything I've seen. The guy's 22 years old, almost 23, but a guy who's got 12 wins, who's got a good level of competition, who's gone out there, fought decent level of regional scene, beat Askar, a notable name there as well, and a guy who I do think has a versatile skill set. He is very aggressive, like Liam mentioned, is going to go right to that offense early on. Is going to be takedowns, ground and pound, threatened submission. He works through all his positions very well. He is a very opportunistic finisher, a guy who that is going to be able to go out there and capitalize on mistakes his opponents make. And I do really like that from him as someone who does seem to be really active, and I do think he's able to push a solid pace as the fight goes on. His striking is something that I still think can be improved. He's got very good hand speed. I think he's got the ability to go out there and fight extended fights, utilize the potential, let's say, oh, there you go. You got that listed for me right there. But yeah, a guy who I do think has the ability to win striking changes as he improves. Someone who, although he's still developing, is someone who can go out there, land leg kicks. You see the size discrepancy. There we go.
Honestly, for me, man, it doesn't look that huge, right? Like obviously there is a size discrepancy, but I feel like the musculature makes up for it. I feel like they're around the same size.
Dude, and I don't know if you saw it or like when I was doing my first research, I swear it's in my notes right here. It said 5'3", and they corrected it. And now it says 5'6" on Tapology. So I don't know if I'm going crazy right now or what's going on here, but
Dana White made the call. He's like, nobody that's 5'3" fights in my organization. Get that out of here.
Like, double check that here. But no, a guy who I do think has the skill sets to pay off this price tag, a guy who I do think is very talented. Like I mentioned, his striking is still developing. He's got the leg kicks. He is someone who is very aggressive on the feet as well. And a guy who I just think is making the proper strides and is the A side of this matchup. You look at someone in Ramos taking a short notice, all power to him. I like the guy. He's got a very aggressive skill set in his own right, but in a different way. Ramos is going to go out there, look to destroy you early. He looks to take you down, ground and pound, threaten submissions. He is very, very aggressive early on. Ramos is aggressive in the way that he'll walk you down. He'll look to put on the pressure. He'll look to break you as the fight goes on. He doesn't have the most one-shot power, but he'll look to break you, as I mentioned, look to make you crumble. And a guy like this, who is going to be older, is someone who I do think is pretty well rounded. And honestly, I do not think Ramos is a bad fighter, but he doesn't excel in any area better than Bashi here in this matchup here. And I do think in the scrambles, Ramos has put himself in a precarious situation against lower level of competition. I do think Bashi can take advantage of that. I am pretty high on this Bashi kid. I do think he can get it done any way he wants, whether it be with ground domination, catching Ramos in a transitional error that Ramos makes, or even landing a powerful shot on the feet. I do think Bashi is a very hyped up prospect for a good reason. Still young, so he can make improvements, but a guy who I do think is on the right track. I do like this guy. Very wide price tag, but one of my favorite options so far on the slate here. Yeah, man, the line is something that's I'm really getting to. I have to look at the rest of the prop market. If I get a good enough line, I'm like a minus 3.5 prop, because although I think Bashi gets this finish more times than not, I like to have my bases covered. I do think it's a parlay leg if I'm looking at that, but not in the mood to really play any minus 600 outright. Are there any markets that have stood out to you this week on this fight?
I mean, again, the prices aren't great here. I always encourage people to wait for the domestics on these kind of fights. I mean, the fight not to go the distance is about minus 170. I think that Bashi is probably going to win this fight inside the distance at a decent enough clip, but it's not tremendous value. It's not like jump out of your chair value, something like that. It just seems to me like that's probably the way I would look here. I think that the submission at plus 125, it doesn't get me out of bed. It's just not a great price. I think he could ground and pound to a finish if he was on top. Right. I always talk about if you're in a position to go for the submission, you're in a position to TKO somebody. So I think that for those reasons, I would probably just lay this short chalk instead. But I'll think a little bit more on this one and see what domestics open up. I just think that Bashi probably wins this one and wins it inside the distance.
For sure. And hey, like you mentioned, if you can submit somebody, you can ground them out. Just ask your girl Jacqueline Amarine, who is fighting this weekend as well. So, interesting spot here as well. I do think Bashi's multitude ways going to get done. I do like him in this spot. Appreciate everybody for hanging out here live with us right now. It's week 4. Every single week, me and Liam are talking fights. On the odd weeks, next week especially, we'll be on Liam's channel at LiamPicksFights. He'll be able to plug all his work, but it's also present down below. So be sure to check him out. Hit a like button, subscribe to his channel over there. And then all the even weeks we're here, usually joined by our friend Pierce. Pierce has some other matters to attend to this week, so we wish him all the best. We hope to see him next week. Love Pierce, so hopefully he's able to go out there, and make sure you're checking him out on Twitter at BigBird_PH to be sure you check out what he's playing as well. We do love our boy Pierce here as well. Let's move on to our co-main event at 185, the highly touted 12-3 Will Currie versus 9-1 Jordan Santos. We have ourselves another big favorite, which seems to be the trend on this card here. Will Currie, a Cage Warriors guy, a guy who is actually, thanks, big shout out to Liam. If you guys are not following Liam on Twitter, be sure to do that. Always posting some great tidbits. The largest social media presence on the card, a guy who is very popular around the streets, a guy who does have a pretty good reputation for himself, has fought very well in Cage Warriors, has some good level competition, a couple losses to Christian Leroy Duncan, who's doing well in the UFC, a close, really controversial 5-round decision loss in that one as well. A guy who has been tested, a guy who is a fairly decent prospect. When he's facing lower level of competition, he is a phenomenal hammer. He will run right through you. He's got a very good ground game. He's very aggressive, solid jiu-jitsu, especially over there against that Cage Warrior level of competition. Is someone who does primarily like to utilize that ground game. Is someone who wants to take you down, wants to transition to that stuff. Does have some solid striking the feet in terms of able to spam that leg kick, able to go first, but someone who doesn't react the best to pressure, someone who doesn't react the best to damage. And although he is someone who is very good offensively on the mat, I haven't seen him tested all too much in the grappling exchanges or when someone's going towards him, utilizing that pressure. I still think there are flaws to his game. And I think what it comes down to, I'll talk about Santos shortly here, but a guy in Currie who I think is a phenomenal hammer and not the best nail, which doesn't always translate the best when you are a -400 favorite here on Dana White Contender Series. That being said, though, Currie is still a very good prospect, especially on the mat. He is facing Brazilian, though. Jordan Santos, 27 years old, training partner with the Bone Theme brothers. He doesn't have the most striking on the most power on the feet to take advantage of that shelled up defense that Currie does have, but a guy who is pretty well rounded, a guy who does have the ability to compete on the mat as well. He does have some decent jiu-jitsu, but isn't always the aggressor down there. Is someone who used to fight at heavyweight and has kind of made his way down, and is a guy who has looked to make those improvements. He is 9-1, has looked a bit better as the fight goes on, has not fought since November 2022, so there's still things to learn about a guy in Santos, but a guy who I think has a pretty wide skill set. His takedown defense looks good. He doesn't have the most one-shot knockout power, but he will go forward. He is a pretty good volume striker in the feet to go out there and win minutes. I think he has a decent overall skill set, and maybe I'm trying to rationalize the fact that I think this line is wide, but I do think Santos deserves more merit to him than the line entails this week. Gun to my head here, I did write down that I do think Currie is the A side. He is someone who they're looking to promote, so I do think I pick Currie in the matchup, but if this line keeps climbing, I will take a shot on Santos. I think he has some tools to get done. I think he's a solid fighter, and Currie just has too many flaws to be trusted at a -400 price tag. What are your thoughts on this one? How much credence are you putting towards this big social media presence, and are you looking forward to this fight?
You know, I think that when you're talking about social media numbers, it's important, but it's also not everything, right? And I think that there's sometimes when people overread it and sometimes people ignore it to their own peril. When you're looking at this kind of fight, though, like Will Currie, he's had a lot of promotion in Cage Warriors. You know, he's fought UFC level guys. He's fought prominent names. He's still a very young man, but overall, is his social media following like blowing your hair back? Is it something like that? No, it's not. You know, if you look at weeks past, it wouldn't be in the top 3 of a few of the weeks that have passed. So he's got a medium social media following, and he's got a great physique, right? If you're just like rank ordering like the reasons why he's here, he's got the look, right? He looks like a fighter. He looks like a guy who's ready to be in prime time. I just don't know if he's got the right balance of tools. When you look at what he brings to the table, he's a very front-loaded guy. It's acknowledged on Cage Warriors commentary. They're fully aware of the fact that he's going to fight differently in the first 7.5 minutes than the latter 7.5 minutes. And when you talk about, you know, one of my fundamentals, one of the things that stuck with me since I've been betting this sport is ABCs. Always bet on cardio. Something John Anik used to always talk about. It's very simple way to look at the sport. But I mean, if I can't do this for 15 minutes, eventually, if we're still out here, the live line's going to flip because I can't physically continue to do this. And I think about a guy like Will Currie as a guy who, despite all his talent, despite the skills, his ability to get to the position he wants, what's one thing that will frustrate you if you're betting on this sport? Imagine you have a guy that can get to the positions he wants and then he still loses the positions. It's like, imagine if Aljamain Sterling gets Piotr Jan's back, puts the body triangle in, and then 30 seconds later, they're back up on the feet. I mean, for fuck's sake, it wouldn't be a very effective position then, would it? Right? But the whole point was hey, I get this position. We're stuck here for 4.5 minutes. Thanks anyways. That's the round for me, right? And that's not really what we see from Will Currie. He gets to the top position. He does some damage. And if you capitulate, if you give up, if you quit, that's the end of it, right? If he's able to get to a dominant position a couple times in a row, maybe he finishes the fight. But if that doesn't happen, what tends to happen is he starts to get to a good position and then the person makes a move. They try and buck, they try and sweep, they try and get back up, they try and reverse the position, and he falls over, loses the spot, gets sent back up to his feet, got to start all over again. And for me, against low-level guys, against guys in Cage Warriors that physically have no business being in there with you, you can make that look serviceable. But against guys that can offer resistance, I don't think it's going to work. And was I blown away by Desjardins Santos? No. Was I like, this is an easy click? No, it's not that either. He doesn't look like the same kind of athlete. But his loss in professional setting was at 205 pounds, right? He's a guy that used to just show up looking like he didn't have a very athletic body composition. He still does not look like the world's greatest athlete, right? If they were to go run 40-yard dash and, go through like a bunch of athletic events, I'm not sure our guy Desjardins Santos would do very well. But what did I see from him? When he gets taken down, he tries to get back up to his feet and then take the other guy down. He looks for trip takedowns, simple shit, to end up on top, try and hold somebody down, try and ride the wrist, try and punch him in the side of the head. Is it a pretty style? No, it is not. Is it the most effective, get a contract on the Contender Series style? Maybe it is not. But could he go out there and steal this decision? I think he absolutely could do that. I think that is probably a path to victory to consider. Me and VB talked about that fact. Like, just looking at Will Currie, he just starts to play a little guard and feel sorry for himself when he gets tired. It's just the way I see it. Like he's out there against CLD. And is CLD the most physically imposing guy? No, I mean, like, he's a pretty good clinch fighter. He's a very tactical guy. He's fast. You would give a lot of positive attributes before you start talking about this guy's physical strength. Oh, he's a hoss. He just throws people around. It's like, no, that's kind of been what holds him back against these guys in the UFC. Grown-ass middleweights just sit him down, pick him up, put him on his ass, Like, that's been the problem for him. And meanwhile, it's like he's just bullying Will Currie after they get to the 6-minute point. Like throwing him around and shit in the clinch. I was like, dude, physically they look like a mismatch, and yet the guy who looks like he's like balding and like looks like he's way older and doesn't look like he's got the same physicality was just owning him in a bunch of these positions. And I was like, dude, that's not going to work out long term. So again, young enough guy that he can make these improvements and get better. Definitely has great front-loaded skills. First, 6 minutes of this fight, even if you're holding the Desjardins, oh God, this is hard to watch, right? It's probably going to get a little ugly. But if he can survive that, I think he's much more likely to come out in round 2 with a smile on his face and say, hey, let's figure it out now. And I think that Will Currie, if that scenario starts to play out, I think he will break mentally. I've seen it happen to him before. Frankly, like the fact that he was able to rally back and win the 5th round against Mick Stanton, hats off to him. People are saying that was a robbery. In some breakdowns I've heard this week. In my humble opinion, as a fan who's watched this shit for a long time, I was watching live and I had said to myself, holy shit, he needs a finish going into round 5. I thought he was down 2, 3, and 4. I was like, how are you losing rounds 2 and 3 to a guy in his mid-30s, who's a journeyman type of guy? It's not a great look for me. None of that's a great look. And the last thing I'll leave you with here is the lack of adjustments. Here's what I mean. You look at the Christian Leroy Duncan fight. He gets hurt in the 2nd round after winning the 1st round, and the fight gets stopped a little bit prematurely, but not a lot prematurely, right, Gordon? Like, he was hurt. He was hurt very badly. He started to wrestle up on a single leg. They stopped the fight. It was a little premature, but he was hurt badly. They rematch. He comes out hot in the 1st round. In the second round, he gets dropped badly. And then that was where I got the expression, playing guard and feeling sorry for himself. That was the third round of that fight, where he basically just said, yeah, you got me, and just let the fight slip out of his hands. So then you see, okay, how did it look against this Mick guy? He comes out and looks great in round one. And they're talking about, it's looking great in round one, but, what happens if this fight starts to get extended? And he starts to get reversed. So if you get reversed in round two, and then you come back out and you make the adjustment in round three, we're not having the conversation. But he doesn't. He's getting hit with the same one-arm reversal, like throw the guy to his back. I can honestly say that exact same thing was happening to me when I was a junior in high school. Like you got to kind of learn those lessons at a younger age. You got, or if not, then you got to kind of put those things together real quick when you're a professional of fighting, right? This guy who's just pulling out like gimmicky, junior high moves, like grab the elbow and just roll with it. He hit that several times. He was putting himself in turtle, giving up his back, saying, please take my back. And then as soon as he would take his back, he would reverse him instantly. I was like, are you serious, man? What is your corner here for? If not to tell you, hey, buddy, don't take his back again for the love of all things holy. Please stop. And he can't do it. It's like he's on autopilot out there fighting. And the same thing happens when he's in the top half guard. He starts to mount up for, I'm going to do, and then the guy just pushes him over and he falls over and he's in the bottom position, starts playing guard again like it's a jiu-jitsu match. Not for me, brother. Not for me at minus 400. So respect the guy, respect his game. Think he comes out hot in the early going. Think he could definitely TKO this guy in the first round and look like $1 million. But I don't believe long-term in the skills I saw, honestly. So guy, room for improvement. High ceiling with that body and everything, got the look. But, man, I'm not buying it right now. I think it's more hype than substance right now.
And that's all fair, dude. I completely agree. I think the line is wide as well. If you were to play Santos, are there any props to stick out to you? Any method of victory that really stands out? Because personally, I don't see him as the biggest finishing threat. And I think, if anything, Santos is winning a decision off of optics. Would you find any value in playing decision line, or would you just play his money line outright?
I would say at over 3-1, I always would just take the money line no matter what, right? Like if I wanted to take a prop, I'd take the money line for a small amount no matter what. And then I would take whatever other prop I was looking at. I do think the decision at plus 625 is somewhat interesting, but I wouldn't bet it. I think you'll get a 10-1 on a domestic. I truly believe that in a fight like this with a 3-1 type underdog. Would not be surprised to see that. Moreover, the other thing I would look at is the round 3 prop. It's 25-1 on Bet Online. I just think that, Will Currie is a guy, we've seen him hurt in the second round multiple times, but he's a tough guy, right? He's not like a guy who's just going to quit, but I do think he's a guy that will gas. And the one thing about his opponent I mentioned is he will work. He'll continue to work. It's not super dangerous and impressive, but he also has a jiu-jitsu pedigree. So what happens if Will Currie just starts to get owned in his own positions later in the fight? I would not be surprised if he ended up capitulating in that kind of scenario. So that's all, is for me. I don't think that's super likely, but that's the way I would see it having to go is, in round 1, he's going to have his hands full. He's going to want to grab a hold of this guy, get real close and try not to get punched in the face. But I think the longer the fight goes, the more he could just continue the exchanges deep into the round. Will Currie sometimes will start a round looking okay, but by the 2-minute mark of the round, he's just like, fuck it, and starts phoning it in and starts going to his back. And it's a really bad optical situation for trying to win cage fights, especially when you're not in England anymore.
Yeah. And hey, if there's anyone who's going to put some respect on the Brazilian, it is someone like Liam here. I like it. I think if there's a dog, I have to go out there and look towards. I think Santos is someone who I do think the line is wide. So interesting fight. Happy we align on that one. It's not always we're always agreeing, but let's see if we agree on this final one here. The main event, 170 with a 9-0 Igor Cavalcanti versus the 10-2 Hyun. What a fight. It is an interesting one. I don't know how much you were able to find tape. I have really struggled to find tape on Cavalcanti, but his record speaks for himself, right? 9-0. All of his wins have occurred in the very, very first round. Has never seen a second round. Only 2 of those fights made it past the 2.5-minute mark, too. The guy is extremely aggressive. He is 26 years old. Incredibly long reach, and those anthropomorphic advantages are something that we can talk about as well. But a guy who just has this like finishing build and the mentality to go out there like, I'm going to run right through you. I'm going to swing heavy. I'm going to go forward. I will take you down if I have to. I will throw you to the mat. I will submit you. And again, very small sample size. I have not found that much tape on him. So if you could find any more, please let me know. But a guy who is just, this seems to be this insane offensive threat early on. A guy who's extremely explosive, extremely dangerous, and has done very well against that level of competition so far. He's facing a guy here in Sunghyun Ko, who is 10-2, who is a combat sambo champion, a guy who is 28 years old, has fought a more competent level of competition, and there's definitely more of a proven commodity on him, and someone who I do think has a solid overall skill set. He has a loss to Sasha Pakalnikov, who tells you at least you're fighting UFC caliber guys. You should probably beat him if you want to beat in the UFC, but at least you're going out there and fighting some decent guys. But a guy who is just more proven, wants to keep it on his feet. I think if this fight gets extended, is the better point fighter of the two. Able to blast the leg kicks, blast the body kicks. A guy who I do think can do well in extended affairs, but a guy who does back up, who can be hit, who can be cracked, who has been finished, and is not really wrestling to the ground at all. The way I see this fight, though, is we have this unknown product here in Cavalcanti who is extremely dangerous, who has a jiu-jitsu game, who has power on the feet, a guy who is very unproven, who would definitely gas that after round one. And that first round is going to be the way more aggressive fighter, the way more dangerous fighter, versus a guy in Ko who we know more about him, but we know what he is. He wants to strike. He wants to strike from range, and we've seen him blitz. We've seen him struggle on the mat before, and it seems like a huge matter of if, right? If Ko can survive that first round, I think he'd have success because we don't know what we're getting from Cavalcanti. But early on, I do think it's Igor's fight to lose. Very small sample size. Seems like it's set up for him to have success here. Super fun matchup. I think it's a one that could go a multitude of ways. First of all, were you able to find any additional information on Cavalcanti? And if not, what are your thoughts of this matchup as a whole?
This is the tricky one. You asked, did I find any more footage? No, that's the answer, right? I found old footage of this guy. I found Instagram pictures that I'll never, unsee, right? Like this guy, he's got a very interesting profile. But in any case, right? When I saw these guys face off, if you don't mind, could you share the screen for just 1 second? I still have Will Currie up on the screen right now from the last fight. But if you're looking, like this is the Will Currie face off. These guys, I feel like look, similar in size, but just a difference in musculature and definition, right, for the Will Currie side. But if you look, this guy Cavalcanti, let's do a little show and tell here, right? If you guys can see where we're at on the screen, if y'all don't know what HGH gut is, like look that up and then tell me if you think it looks anything similar to what this guy Cavalcanti is dealing with, because for the love of all things, true and holy, I don't see another way, right? The guy's abs are protruding out in a way that is shocking. That being said, extreme musculature, looks like the bigger fighter, the bigger athlete in this spot. One thing I wanted to note about his opponent here is he has been knocked out before. The Palatnikov fight I could not find, but what I will say is Palatnikov is listed on UFC stats as a switch stance fighter. And his opponent, when he faced a step up in competition, he fought another southpaw. He fights out of the southpaw stance. So for Ko, I think that, fighting other southpaw is going to be a huge problem for him. Right. And something we want to watch moving forward. Does he make any adjustments? Does he learn from that? Because he was just a mark for the left hand. And I would suspect that Palatnikov probably caught him the same way because he just didn't have great defense in those exchanges. He seems like he's very confident when he can get off on his southpaw double attack. Right. If you guys are watching fights for a long time, you'll notice southpaws a lot of times. They don't try and just line up their jab all night. They're trying to throw from the rear hand. They're trying to throw the rear kick, and it's to keep people occupied so they don't throw the jab back, so they basically can keep their opponents weary of these big, powerful attacks. And what he does is he'll intermix those attacks with the low kicks, with the jab. When he can't get off on those kind of balancing attacks, he's just a little bit too easy to hit, right? And for Cavalcanti, that's where he's very dangerous. He comes out, he swings extremely aggressively in the footage that I did watch. Did it look super technical? Did it look like he's the cleanest striker you've ever seen? No. But do you see the build on that guy? It doesn't need to be that technical, right? It's landing hammers on the side of your head. It's going to hurt, right? But the things that I saw on tape, he goes out there, throws 2 hooks, shoots a double leg on a guy that looked like a sack of potatoes, right? He just picked him up, threw him sideways. Like that doesn't show you how somebody's going to fight when they meet resistance. So this is probably the first real opponent he's fought, but it's an opponent that has been knocked out twice. So I think that he could go out there and knock him out. I think there's a chance that he could just be superior on the ground, leverage his size, his physicality, his brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, go out there and take advantage. But the guy who's got more professional experience, who's been around for a long time, who's been working with UFC level fighter, stun gun, Deon Hong Kim. I think that those are some positive attributes for the underdog here, some things that could be bullish signals. Also, I want to give him some credit because I do some Instagram stalks, right? The guy's been training at Bangtao Muay Thai. The guy's been training at AKA. He's been going around getting different looks, bringing his team with him on this journey as well. So it's not like, he's just gone out and looking for new teams, looking for new answers. It's like, no, me and my team invested in the journey. We go out together, getting a bunch of different training. And it seems like he's very invested. But Cavalcanti, we talk about sometimes on this show. And if Pierce was here, he'd be talking about it right now. It's aura, bro. It's just the guy looks like a UFC fighter. He looks like a guy that they want to sign. He looks like a guy you'd want to ask some questions. Hey, man, what do you do for a living? Who are you? Like, he just looks like a cool guy. So I think they obviously, want to set him up for a winnable opportunity, but he's a very young guy. Raised on the right side of 30. He's 26 years of age, I believe. His opponent here also on the right side of 30. These are two young guys. They represent different, interest groups for the UFC, so to speak, right? Different demographic groups. And they're happy, I think, with either one of these guys getting the advancement here. Two guys that have pretty fun styles that are looking to go out there, finish fights, willing to go out there and take some risks as well. And, oftentimes they're not looking for the guy who's super conservative and finds a way to eke out the close decisions on the regional scene. That's just not what they're in the business of. And these two guys, there are question marks, right? I always talk about if there are unknowns, if there are things where you don't really feel great about how do I answer this question, that should push the line a little bit closer to 50-50. That's what unknowns are. But I also think that when you talk about upside, when you talk about potential, I do think that this guy Cavalcanti probably has a higher ceiling, in terms of where he could get to because of the look, because of the way he presents, because of all the other intangible features. But I think that who could win on Saturday night, maybe that's a little bit of a closer call. I think that Ko has fought a little bit more serious competition. So sometimes when you lose fights, people will hold that against you and say, hey, this guy sucks. Look at all his losses. But you have to ask yourself, like, how would this guy have done if he fought the similar opponents? Right. And honestly, I think that this guy, Cavalcanti, would probably smash Sasha Palatnikov into a pace, if I had to guess. Right. But if I had to guess how he would do against that other guy, I don't know. That becomes a little bit more of an open question because that other guy's a solid enough fighter, a real pro in his own right, and a guy that's fought other resisting opponents. So it's all good to be a bully and use your skills that you have, real fighting skills, to bully people. But it's another question, what's going to happen when you meet some legitimate resistance? And we might not find out on Saturday, right? He literally might hit this guy with one punch and kill him. But I do think that he's got potential to, meet real resistance in that fight. And so that will give you some answers. Like, does this guy really want to fight? Because a lot of guys like to be bullies and like to go out there and beat people up. But as soon as they start getting hit, they're like, fuck, this is not what I signed up for. And I do think that Ko is going to go out there and swing heavies, right? He's going to go out there and try and connect with that left hand and with that big kick, so he's throwing a lot of heavy offense. I think that Cavalcanti, though, faster, probably a little bit heavier offense in his own right. So if he's a fighting nerd, right, if he's going to tape, if he's doing the studying, he's going to come out in that southpaw stance and laser this guy with the left hand. But if he comes out orthodox like I saw on his old tape, then I think it's going to be a little bit more of an interesting fight where at least that southpaw double attack has a chance to land.
Yeah, which makes sense, dude. And you look at the lines here. You got minus 140 Cavalcanti KO. You have minus 120 Cavalcanti round one. You have minus 270 for him one side of the distance. He is favored to go there after success.
I prefer that round one to the KO, just off rip, by the way.
That's the next point I was going to say is it's not like Cavalcanti is going to have a huge grappling advantage here, in my opinion, as well. If we get a better domestic line, it's something that I would look towards, even though Cavalcanti looks like he wants to pound your face in, if I'm being completely honest. But he does have a submission game. So I think there are a couple ways to attack this one. I think it's going to be a fun fight. I think it's going to be a very dangerous one on both sides. It's hard to trust Cavalcanti with limited sample size, but he does seem like the more violent side of this matchup. He does seem like someone who is going to push the pace early. And if you are betting the co side, you can call me crazy on this one, but it seems like more maybe a potential live entry. I don't think he has that same round one equity that someone like Cavalcanti has, and I do think he's going to have more of a success as the fight goes on. More of a dangerous play there, but I don't mind that. But we have broken down 5 fights. And what we do here on both the Plays and Fades YouTube channel and the Liam's Picks Fights channel, we go over, we give ourselves a quick recap. So what we're going to do this week, because we're feeling nostalgic, we're back in the OG room, we're going to bring it back. Liam, if you'd like to, a little Hail Mary parlay as well, something we have done typically on this channel for Day White Contender series. I got a 3-legger that we'll give out, have some fun here. But let me break down the entire card, quick breakdown style. The very first fight, Salkilld versus Hyun. I think gun to my head, I'd pick Salkilld. I think he has more ways of getting it done, the more proactive grappler, the longer reach advantage, and a guy who I do think has some decent counters. With that being said, I'm not a guy who I want to put too much faith into. I think Hyun does have a ton of power. Hyun could win the wrestling exchanges as well. I think it's a very close competitive fight. I do edge towards Salkilld, though. Clark Duben, Canadian prospect Clark, I'm all for it. She's someone who I think is going to have a huge physicality advantage, a way better level of competition, is the more proven fighter. Someone who's striking, who I would like to see improve. So someone who I do think it's harder for me to trust a minus 900, but a girl who I do think wins this fight more times than not. She is very aggressive, very physically imposing, and very dominant in the clinch. And I do think she gets the win here. Bashi versus Ramos. I love Bashi. I think he's going to do some really good things. 22 years old, 12-0. You cannot say enough good things about the guy. I think he's going to be very aggressive early on. I think he's getting an early finish. And he is one of my favorite plays in the entire slate. Favorite prospect in the entire slate as a whole, I think, is going to be Austin Bashi. Currie versus Jordan here. This is what I'm struggling with. The line is wide. I think when it comes down to it, going to my head, I think Curry's the A side, who I think would be my pick to win. But Jordan has a ton of value. I think I'll play it. If I had to pick a side to play from a betting perspective, would be Jordan. I do think he can go out there and win the volume on the feet, the metrics that way as well. As long as he survives that ground onslaught from Currie. Currie does shell up. He does have his flaws, and I do think Jordan's fighting out of a good camp, is able to compete in all these aspects too. Is pretty well rounded. You look at someone like Jordan here. I think he may not be the same physical specimen early on, but someone who can compete as the fight goes on is pretty well rounded. Pick is Currie, value on Jordan there. And then the main event, not lots to say about Cavalcanti, very limited sample size guy who I think is very explosive, though very dangerous. Think he is someone who was brought into here to bring in entertaining fights, is a guy who I think can take advantage of someone in who can be taken down, who can be hit, who can shell up against a cage. I do think Cavalcanti is very aggressive, and that is shown by his side of the distance line. I do think it's done more times than not. If you're in a play I do think it's a live entry spot. I do think Cavalcanti is the right side. So a chalky week for me. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to force underdogs. I think if there's any you have to pick this week, it's probably the Jordan side and maybe even some Gage Young sprinkled as well. But Hail Mary-wise, 3 legs I'm looking that are going to pay out pretty well. We're going to go with Igor Cavalcanti, round 1. We are going to go with Salkilld by submission. So again, 2 chalkier ones, and then we're actually going to go towards something that, let's go with Jordan by decision as the final one to add a lot more value on that one, which is plus 625. So a plus 625, a minus 120, and a plus 185. What about you, Liam? Not only what are your quick picks, but also where can they find you? And if you got yourselves a Hail Mary, I'm happy to hear it.
Hell yeah, man. So first fight of the night, I don't really feel too bullish. I think that the way to exploit it is maybe to look for the best available price on the Salkilld sub or the Young by KO. I think that if it goes to a decision, probably looking at a competitive price, a competitive fight. So I would probably look towards the underdog or pass, but ultimately the size disparity and the fact that I'm picking Salkilld outright, it's just going to be a pass for me in all likelihood in this matchup. And the sub is ultimately the pick there in terms of how I think he gets it done. Sub round 2 or 3. I think that for Shannon Clark, it's probably going to be a TKO in round 2 or 3 more often than not. I just think that she's the much more physical fighter. I wouldn't even be surprised if she blitzkrieged her in the first round, honestly. She just comes out with a lot of aggression, intensity. I wouldn't say there's a ton of great sophistication, but what did we just see from Andreas Gustafsson? Relentless knees to the body from the clinch is the MMA meta, right? If you can do that, why not, right? If they can't stop you, keep doing it, and eventually they will fold up shop. And I think that this woman is capable of that. I think she's got a good cage push game. I think the small cage of the Apex will benefit her as well. So I just think she's got a lot to work with in terms of her strength, physicality, size difference. I think it all portends to a advantage for her. I think that the next fight up is Bashi, and I think he's going to do good things. I expect him to win inside the distance as well in this fight. I think Ramos on short notice is going to have a hard time keeping pace with him. I think that Ramos is a guy that doesn't have the same power, the same pop And I also think that he can get dominated physically in the wrestling and the grappling phases here. I think the musculature is a little bit different. So overall, I like the Bashi side. I just think he's a better fighter right now, a little bit more ready out the gates. The one thing I will say as a warning here is I've talked about before, when I feel a fighter is at an advantage from their youth versus a disadvantage at 22 years of age, that can be a little bit difficult sometimes, because you go up against men, grown ass men, 30 years of age, and it can be a little bit physically jarring. But I think this kid has enough tape of him fighting grown, experienced men and doing very well that I'm going to say I trust him here. But you got to just understand that fighters that can underperform sometimes are a little bit younger, right? And it can be mental errors, it can be physical deficits, a couple different things to note there. But overall, I think Bashi is a great fighter, great skill set, and he has a very bright future. I think the next fight up is an interesting one because Will Currie, for me, has all the makings of a guy that's less than the sum of his parts. He's got great physicality. He's got a great look. He's got an ability to go out there and do damage in the early going, but I've seen a number of times him fumble good positions, winnable fights, winnable opportunities, and not make the right adjustments that he needs to. I think on the other side, you got a guy who's cut the right amount of weight. He's now in a much more optimal functional weight class. He's a guy that has shown instead of laying on his back, and letting a round pass him by, he'll try and work back up to his feet, then get his own takedown, end the round on top, smart optics to win a decision. And for me, those are the kind of intangibles that I'm looking for in an underdog like this. And he doesn't have some of the same glaring red flags that you see on a guy like Ko in the main event. And that does take us to our main event where I think that, a guy in Igor Cavalcanti is probably going to win this fight in the first round. However, it's being priced accordingly, and you're basically being asked to pay a huge price tag for a guy who's never been outside the first round, and he doesn't have a lot of footage on tape, and he looks like he's got a career in modeling that he's got on the back burner if he doesn't want to do this fighting shit. So it just seems to me like a guy that could be a great prospect and a guy that has a bright future, or a guy that could be a flash in the pan that comes and goes. So for me, I like the Cavalcanti side. I think he wins this one, but he's got to prove it to me at this kind of price tag. It's very price prohibitive, I feel. And I think that for the Ko side, he's fought the more credible guys. And so, we hold it against him that he's lost, that he's got knocked out. But again, I just question, how would Cavalcanti do if he was fighting real guys? We don't know the answer to that. So I think we're going to get a better answer on Tuesday. As for, our long shot parlay, my man, as you know.
You're good.
Can you hear me, buddy?
You're all good, brother. I can hear you.
Okay. I jammed up the mute button there for a second. So here we're back at it. If I had to, make a quick roundup parlay for you on this card, the way I would do it is either I would take that underdog money line on the Ribeiro side and then go with whatever sides you like, because that's going to sweeten up the pot. It's going to give you that big plus money return. But the way I would look at it, if you want to be a little more on the, conservative side, the chalky side of things, I think that Clark inside the distance, I think that Bashi inside the distance are, mismatch type of fights. And not to say that the other fighters, don't deserve to be there, but I just think in terms of physicality, musculature, and then as well, what they can leverage in terms of pressure on the ground, I feel like there's going to be a pretty substantial difference there. And then I would lean towards the under 1.5 rounds in the main event. Obviously, if it goes over that, it becomes dicey. It becomes, hey, what the hell is going to happen here? But I feel like we've got a guy in Cavalcanti who basically has never been outside the first round, and it's saying 70% or so that this fight ends in round one, in the first 7.5 minutes. And I'm like, we don't even have proof that this guy has cardio to fight 7.5 minutes, right? He comes out swinging hammers from his hips like he's trying to kill somebody. It's like definitely a dangerous guy, but we have a lot of unknowns that say these guys are probably going to get in a violent confrontation and it's probably going to end early. When our guy has lost, it's been getting knocked out, clipped in the early going as well. So, for me, that feels like a logical play. Those two that I think are in mismatches inside the distance alongside the under 1.5 in the main event.
Hey, I like those there. I agree with all those takes there. So as always, happy to have you join me here. That was a fun one. I do think it's be a pretty fun episode tomorrow. I think it's a good one. And I do like doing these shows on Monday too. And we have props to look at and gauge. I look forward to seeing how everything opens up on all the domestic books. And before we get out of here though, please tell the people where they can find you and what you have coming up the rest of the week. I know we had a late notice cancellation about as Schnell did pull out of this fight there recently, or Costa. That fight's off nonetheless. So I know you posted some great highlights, but where can they find you and what do you got going on this week?
Yeah, I think that was a Costa shoulder injury, unfortunately. But I'm excited. I got a lot of content that's going to be coming out this week. I might have some Contender Series updates tomorrow on my channel after we get domestic props that open up. So you can stay tuned for that. And then I've got Bets and Banter coming later on in the week, talking about UFC Vegas 97. We'll update on all those fights after I do my tape study and my research there. So yeah, I'm excited about all that's coming up. If you can, just find me everywhere at LiamPicksFights. I'd appreciate the support. Thanks, guys.
And next week, that is where we will be. We will be on the LiamPicksFights channel for week number 5. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Hit the like button down below. Subscribe to the channel. Best of luck in all your betting endeavors this weekend. You can check out all my final plays at Gordo Games on Twitter. And let's make some money, guys. Peace. Good luck. Enjoy the fights. And let's go.